Tractate Bava Batra, page 104. We are 15 lines from the top of the page. We continue the subject, painful subject of disputation between the seller and buyer. The idea is, as we explained many times, that the ideal situation is when things are total clear. When things are not 100% clear, there's all kind of issues later on, and you try to address it in the most fairest way and correct way. So today is another scenario. The scenario is that the buyer-seller disputation over the exact deal, if the understanding is correct and if the transactions made in a proper way. So here we have a situation, we use name just for the sake of understanding. Let's say Reuven and Shimon. Reuven is the one who sold the estate. Shimon is the one who paid for the estate. And there are some situations that Reuven provided to Shimon more than it should be, or vice versa, that Shimon basically gets less than he should get. So the Mishnah tells us, Mahu, 15 lines from the top of the page, Mahu machazir lo, and the Mishnah said ma'ot, which means when it happens that the buyer received too much land, meaning when you have the assets, the evaluation, sometimes there is a quick transactions between parties, or all kind of circumstantial evidence that not give the person enough frame of work of understanding or time, and as a result, when one's purchased something, he later on realized that he either, meaning Shimon for that case, is the buyer, he received too much land, and therefore he need to compensate the seller accordingly. And the Mishnah teaches us that what does he return to him? And the answer is money. Why is that money? Because as far as land is a problem, not always the seller wants the land. So obviously the Mishnah said, if the seller said, fine, give me the land, that's a different story, he can do it. But otherwise, not. The framework is that our rabbis teach us that when the buyer pays money in order to enhance the power of the seller, by basically allow it to happen, to give him the chance to get cash. So the sages allow the seller to choose whether to use back the surplus land, or to demand payment from the difference in the evaluation now from the buyer, even though this effectively forces the buyer to purchase the surplus land from him. So again, this is the distance. As far as the Mishnaic definition, we use the term kabin and se'ah. So they said up to 7.5 kabin the beit kol. So that's basically the mekach, the transaction is valid. If it's more than 9 kabin, so then he needs to compensate with cash. So here, the deepest meaning here, the estate that left here, it's too small for the seller to deal with. So the question is, ליפות כוחו של מוכר אמרינן, ליפות כוחו של לוקח לא אמרינן. So it means our goal is only to enhance the seller. How about the buyer? Vatanya will bring another source for similar scenario. פיחת 7 קבין ומחצה לחור, או הותיר 7 קבין ומחצה לבור, הגיעו. So it means if the seller gave the buyer 7.5, in that time it was a kav, but again we can juxtapose it to our measurement nowadays, but he gave him a more, or in this case less than it was stipulated, which is equivalent to a quarter kav se'ah. So basically kor is equal to 30 se'ah. So we said higio. So the court, the rabbinic court, compels the seller to sell it and the buyer to buy the difference. יותר מכאן כופין את המוכר למכור ואת הלוקח לקח. So what you see here, that the sages play it very fair, that they are for both parties, both the seller and the purchaser. So that's basically contradicted to what we learn in the Mishnah, because in the Mishnah we see a special takana, a special rabbinic enactment for the sake of the seller only, and the sale of the estate, this surplus estate, depend upon only by our wishes. So the Gemara said, Hatam, over there when we said that we enforce the seller to sell the additional surplus estate, it's כגון דהווה יקירה מעיקרה וזל השתה, which is, as you know, real estate can change value constantly. So originally at the time of the purchases, the estate was very expensive. Now at the time of the court session it's much less. דאמרין Allah, that we said to the seller, אי ארעה יהבת לי, הב לי כזולה דהשתה. So if you wish to give me land and receive cash and receive money, give me the land according to the current cheaper rate. So that's basically the Braita referring to when it states that the seller is compelled to sell. So the Gemara asks, והתניא כשהוא נותן לו, when the seller give it to the buyer, that's a surplus estate. So נותן לו קשר שלקח ממנו. He needs to pay him according to the rate that he's brought the land from him. So it means that even at the time of the transaction, the time of the sale, the estate was expensive and now it's cheap, the seller entitled to receive for his land the highest value, the highest appraisal for the estate, the way that it was originally as initiates, originally milkatchila. So they said, Hatam kevan dehava zula meikara v'ikara le'ashad. As you know that in real estate it can change constantly. That's what we learned several days ago and on Ale Karkaot. So here, originally speaking, the estate was very cheap. Now it turns to be expensive. So this Braita teaches us that in this type of circumstance, the seller cannot enforce the buyer to purchase that estate for the highest market value at the present time, only the original price, the way it was originally. In basically the buyer, the Rashbam explains, and others, he said, I don't want to basically purchase expensive real estate, and even the milkatchila, originally I will not buy an estate more than my budget, more than the amount that I was planning, which is knowing that it's a cheap estate. So he basically hold that he is going to lose if he's deal with that difference. So therefore you cannot enforce the buyer to buy it. So it means the way we concluded is the right to get it back or to sell it is by the seller. But if at the time of the transaction was the price was totally different than the price at the present time, so the buyer has his right to refuse to purchase the additional estate only if the seller gave him the lowest price of the two. That's the way the Ravid explained. But anyway, there is a book called Gidulei Shmuel that he explained at length the disputation here. So then the Mishnah said to us, Shim shiyer basadeh beitish'a kabin. So they said, if the surplus in the field was in a area required for the sowing of 9 kav of seed, and the garden area required for sowing a half kav of seed, or according to Rabbi Akiva, an area required for sowing for a quarter cup of seeds, the buyer can return the surplus land to the seller, and the seller cannot demand payment in money. Amar Ravuna tish'a kabin shamru, the measurement that the sages hold for 9 kav, that basically the buyer need to return to the seller, that's applied to all different fields. Vafilu bevik'a gdola, even you talk about large valley which measures several kav. So if the surplus is a significant plot of land equal to in size to an area required for sowing of 9 kav of seed, the buyer can return it to the seller, even if it's less than 1/4 of kav par se'ah, which is less than 1/24 of the side of the field that was sold. Rab Nachman Amar, he said that noten shiv'at kabin mechza lechol kor vechor, which means the seller let go basically a surplus of 7.5 kav to each core. So even if the surplus is greater than the area required for sowing of 9 kav. Page 104b. והיא כמילתא יתירה לתשעת קבין. So, and if there is calculation there is still surplus in excess of quarter kav par se'ah, equal in size and area required for sowing of 9 kav of seed, the entire surplus must be returned, hadri. So according to Rav Nachman, that's the first ruling on the Mishnah, that up to the size of Rova kav, the seller can let go. Rav Huna hold the other way around, 80 רבה לרב נחמן, שאם שיער בשדה בתשעת קוראים, לאו דזבין לקוראים. So he said that if the surplus in the field was in the area required for the sowing of 9 kav of seed, the buyer returns the land to the seller. Isn't this the halacha even in a case where they sold the field measuring 2 kor? Which means that even if this surplus does not exceed the quarter kav of se'ah, a quarter kav of se'ah is a field is a 2 kor 15 kav, the sole determining factor is whether or not the surplus is equal in size to an area required for the sowing of 9 kav. But Rav Nachman rejected that and he said, Lo, the zabin lei kor. So the field was measuring of kor. Rav challenged and he said, Ubegina beit chatzi kav. How about in a garden that was an area required for the sowing of half a kav of seed? Lav de zabin le'sa'atayim. So it's not, they put it like in a 2 se'ah, so he said no. La de zabin le'sa'ah. So he sold him a garden measuring of se'ah, so that the surplus is proportionally twice as large. וכדברי רבי עקיבא, בית רובה, מה אליו דזבין לסאה? לא, דזבין לחצי סאה. באי רב אשי, אם היה סמוך לשדהו אפילו כלשהו, מחזיר לו קרקע. He asked a question, what do you do if that the field was sold, was attached or connect to another field belonging to the seller, then even if the surplus was a minimal amount, the buyer can return the land itself to the seller, and the seller cannot demand payment for this money. Why? Because the seller loses nothing when he receives a small tract of land, as he can cultivate it along with his adjusting one field. So he said, as אם ישמו לחסדהו אפילו כלשהו מחזיק לו קרקע. באי רב אשי בור מהו שיהיה תפסיק. He asked, how about the pit between the surplus and in the sold field and the adjoining field belonging to the seller? So he said, אמת המים מהו שתפסיק, דרך הרבים מהו שתפסיק, רכבה לדקלה מהו שתפסיק, and he left all of them in teiko. If you remember yesterday we explained, according to Yerushalmi, it's not a 4 question, it's a 5 questions, but yes, it's according to the Yerushalmi, it's the Marei Panim, bring the Bet Yosef in Siman Resh Yud Chet, bring the Ran, and others said in Har HaMelech that it was 5. Anyway. ולא את הרובע בלבד מחזיר לו, אלא כל הקרקע המותר. So it's not only the quarter kav that the buyer returned, but he returned all the surplus. Why? Because he required to make the refund must be made in a precise amount. So they said, klapei laya, isn't the opposite? So תני רבין בר נחמן, לא את המותר בלבד מחזיר לו, אלא את כל הרבעים כולן. So it's not only what left, but more. So what you see here, when the seller sells the buyer an estate, Beit Kur, which is the 30 se'ah. So in a hypothetical case, let's say if you receive more, if you receive 32 se'ah, so basically it's more than 12 kabin. So if it was less than 9 kabin, which is se'ah v'chetzi, because se'ah is 6 kabin, so he received, for example, 31 1/3 se'ah, plus 2 kabin, so that's basically chariga, an addition of 8 kabin. But that's the conclusion. They said when he is required to return the surplus, he returns not only the surplus, but also all the quarter kav area over the above had originally been stipulated to be included in the sale. Now, there is an important Rashbam in Hilchot Mechira, chapter 28, that I would like to share with you in conclusion. I'm reading from the Koren edition. If one sold a field to another, and the surplus was more than a beit rova par beit se'ah, the buyer must return the surplus to the seller either in land or in money, basically according to the seller's wishes. If, before the buyer took possessions of the surplus, the field was turned into a garden, which means spring emerged so that the land was now fit for growing vegetables, and the surplus was an area required to sow a half cup of seed, in which case the buyer may be allowed to return the land. Or it was initially a garden and it was turned into a field which is spring dried up, then the halacha is uncertain. In such a case, the buyer can make the refund as he chooses in the land or with money, as if the seller is the claimant and the burden of proof less upon him. That's also the Shulchan Aruch Choshen Mishpat in 218. Then the Shulchan Aruch continued and said, although the seller is ordinarily giving the upper hand to choose whether to receive his refund in land or in cash, in money, if the surplus land was adjacent to another field belonging to the seller, the buyer has the option to return the land, since the seller can farm it together with his existing other land and not suffer any loss. Again, as we said, this is the Choshen Mishpat 218, as well as the Rashbam Hilchot Mechira chapter 28.